A young, powerful millionaire was always known for his wealth and success. But one night, everything changed. When he rushed into the hospital holding a weak 3-year-old girl tightly in his arms. What happened next is a story of love, tears, and a lesson that will melt every heart. The night was quiet, too quiet, as Baylor Reed's luxury car rolled slowly through the neighborhood. He usually hated silence, but tonight it felt heavy, pressing against his chest as if the world was holding its breath. The streetlights flickered here and there, casting long shadows that danced across the empty sidewalks. Baylor's sharp eyes were used to spotting opportunities in business, but tonight they caught something far more unsettling. At first he thought it was nothing, just a pile of rags left carelessly by someone. But as he drew closer, his pulse quickened. The shape wasn't just lying still, it was too small, too delicate, and heartbreakingly human. His stomach twisted. He slammed the brakes, the tires screeching in protest. For a moment, the world seemed frozen. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he shoved open the car door and stepped into the chilling night air. There, under the pale yellow light of the street lamp, lay a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Barefoot, her tiny feet scratched and dirty, she was curled into herself as though the cold night might swallow her whole. A torn teddy bear was pressed tightly against her chest, as if it were the only thing left keeping her safe. Baylor felt his throat constrict. He was a man used to controlling empires, commanding boardrooms, and sealing billion-dollar contracts. But this sight shattered him in a way nothing ever had. His perfectly ordered world cracked in one instant. He rushed forward, his polished shoes hitting the ground hard, the sound echoing through the silent street. Kneeling down, his expensive suit brushed the dirt, but he didn't care. All that mattered was the fragile little body lying in front of him. "God, no," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way he had not heard from himself in years. His hands trembled as he reached for her. Her face was pale, far too pale for a child so young. Her lips trembled faintly, her breath shallow, almost fading. Baylor bent down carefully, his strong arms scooping her up as though she were made of glass. The torn teddy bear slipped, but even in her weak state, her tiny hand clung to it. Baylor pressed it back into her arms, his chest burning at the thought of what this little one must have endured. Then, just as he held her against his chest, her eyelids fluttered weakly. For a brief second, her big eyes opened, cloudy, unfocused, filled with pain. Her lips parted, and in the faintest, broken whisper, a single word escaped. Then, just as he held her against his chest, her eyelids fluttered weakly. For a brief second, her big eyes opened, cloudy, unfocused, filled with pain. Her lips parted, and in the faintest, broken whisper, a single word escaped. "Mommy!" Baylor froze. The word pierced him like a blade, a sound so pure yet filled with desperation that it made his heart ache in ways he never thought possible. Before he could say anything, her eyes closed again. Her tiny body went limp in his arms, her breath faint but still there. She was unconscious. A rush of panic tore through Baylor's veins. He was not a man who panicked, ever. But right now, with this fragile child lying helpless against his chest, his soul screamed with fear. Without thinking, he stood, clutching her protectively. He didn't care about his car's spotless leather seats, didn't care about the life he had built on logic and profit. Right now, only one thing mattered: saving this little girl. He pulled open the car door with one hand, holding her securely with the other. His movements were urgent, but gentle, every motion careful not to harm her fragile body. Settling her softly on the passenger seat, he pulled the seatbelt across her tiny form, his hands trembling. For the first time in his life, Baylor felt powerless. He could buy companies, build towers, and bend the world to his will. But in this moment, he was just a man praying silently that this small child would survive. His foot slammed the accelerator. The engine roared, the car speeding through the dark streets, its headlights slicing through the night. Baylor leaned closer to the little girl, whispering words she couldn't hear. "Hold on, sweetheart, and just hold on. I won't let you go." Her small hand twitched faintly against the teddy bear. That tiny movement lit a fire of determination in Baylor's chest. He would not let her slip away. As the hospital's glowing red cross finally appeared in the distance, Baylor pressed harder on the gas, his eyes burning with tears he had not shed in years. Tonight, on this silent street, Baylor Reed's life had changed forever. The soft beeping of medical machines filled the small hospital room, each sound steady yet haunting. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, a sterile kind of cleanliness that somehow made the space feel even colder. Baylor Reed paused at the doorway, his tall figure casting a shadow across the white tiles. For a moment, he could hardly breathe. On the hospital bed, under crisp white sheets that seemed far too big for her tiny body, lay the child he had carried in from the street. Selena Faith. That was what the nurses had called her. But to Baylor, she was still just a fragile little soul he had found abandoned in the darkness. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as though each breath cost her effort. Her lashes, long and dark, rested against her pale cheeks. Her lips were still cracked and dry, the faintest trace of struggle etched across her tiny face. Baylor stepped closer, his polished shoes silent on the floor. He was a man accustomed to walking into boardrooms with power in his stride, but here each step felt cautious, almost reverent, as if approaching something sacred. Beside her, half fallen against the pillow, was the same teddy bear he had seen clutched to her chest on that silent street. Old, dirty, its fur matted, its button eye hanging by a thread, yet somehow it seemed to be her anchor. Baylor's chest tightened at the sight. That bear, worn and broken, was probably the only comfort she had left in this world. He lowered himself into the chair at her bedside, his tall frame looking strangely out of place in the tiny room. For a moment, he simply watched her, his heart pounding as though waiting for her to open her eyes. Then, without really thinking, Baylor reached out. His large, steady hand covered her much smaller one. Her fingers were soft, impossibly small, but they were cold. Too cold. A strange ache spread through his chest as he tightened his hold, silently promising not to let go. The nurse, who had been checking the chart at the foot of the bed, glanced up at him gently. "She's just 3 years old, and she has no one here," she said softly, her voice threaded with quiet sorrow. Baylor looked up sharply, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "No one?" he asked, his tone almost disbelieving. The nurse shook her head, her expression heavy with pity. "When she woke for a short while earlier, she barely opened her eyes. She didn't say much, only one word. Over and over." The nurse hesitated, then added, "She kept whispering, 'Mommy.'" The word pierced Baylor deeper than any business loss ever could. His throat tightened, and he forced his eyes back to the fragile child lying before him. She looked so helpless, so undeserving of such loneliness. For years, Baylor had built his empire on the belief that money could solve any problem. A failing company? Buy it out? A broken system? Restructure it? An obstacle? Pay to remove it. Money was power, and power was safety. That had always been his rule. But now, staring at this unconscious child, he felt stripped of everything he thought made him strong. All the wealth in the world couldn't give her back the mother she cried for. All the power he had couldn't erase the fear and loneliness etched into her small, delicate features. His grip on her hand tightened ever so slightly, as if trying to lend her his strength. He leaned forward, his voice low, almost trembling. "Little one, you're not alone anymore." The words escaped him before he realized he had spoken them, and for the first time in many years, Baylor Reed, powerful, unshakable, untouchable, felt powerless. Not because he was weak, but because he cared. In that quiet hospital room, Surrounded by the hum of machines and the soft glow of a child's fragility, Baylor discovered a truth he had never allowed himself to feel before. His wealth, his empire, his iron will, none of it mattered. What mattered was the tiny life lying in front of him, clutching an old teddy bear, whispering for a mother who would never come. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. Baylor Reed was no longer just a millionaire CEO. He was a man who could not walk away. The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the hospital blinds, painting soft lines across the white walls. Baylor hadn't slept all night. He had stayed in the chair beside Selena's bed, watching her fragile breaths, holding her small hand as though his grip alone could keep her anchored to life. His eyes were heavy, but his heart was heavier. When the doctor finally entered, Baylor rose to his feet immediately. He was a man who usually commanded every room he stepped into, but now he felt like a student about to receive a verdict he wasn't ready for. The doctor carried a thin file in his hands. "Mr. Reed," he said gently, "we've gathered what little information we could find about the child." Baylor's eyes locked onto the folder. It seemed far too thin to hold the weight of a little girl's life. With a silent nod, he reached for it, his hand steady on the outside, but trembling inside. He flipped it open. The first thing he saw was the name. His breath caught. His pulse roared in his ears. Mother's name, Elena Faith. The letters blurred as his vision shook. His hands trembled, gripping the file as though it might slip away. For a long, breathless moment, the world around him ceased to exist. There was only that name. "Elena," Baylor whispered, his voice breaking. Memories he had locked away for years came flooding back in a rush so powerful it nearly knocked him to his knees. Elena, her smile that once lit his dark days, her laughter that softened the edges of his hardened heart. The woman he had loved more than life itself. The woman he had lost because of his pride, his family's cold judgment, and his own foolish choices. He had walked away years ago, believing he was doing the right thing. But he had carried the wound ever since. And now, her name was here, written on the file of a fragile 3-year-old girl lying in a hospital bed. Baylor's heart thundered painfully in his chest. His throat burned as he forced the words out. Is she Elena's daughter?" The nurse, standing quietly nearby, hesitated for a moment before nodding softly. "Yes, she is." The room seemed to close in on Baylor. He turned toward the small bed, his eyes falling on Selena once more. Her tiny chest rose and fell slowly, her hand still curled around that torn teddy bear. And suddenly it was as if he was seeing her differently. This wasn't just any child fate had thrown in his path. This was Elena's child, Elena's flesh and blood. His voice was low, trembling, almost broken. Where is her mother?" The nurse's expression softened with sorrow. "No one has come for her," she said gently. "We don't know where her mother is." Baylor's jaw clenched, his eyes stinging with unspoken pain. He gripped the file tighter, his knuckles whitening. This little girl was not just lost. She was Elena's daughter, the child of the only woman he had ever truly loved, the woman he had let slip away. And now, lying before him was the living piece of her. Baylor's heart twisted in agony and wonder all at once. Selena Faith was not only a child in need, she was the daughter of his lost love, and perhaps his last chance at redemption. That night, the hospital room was filled with silence except for the soft hum of machines. Baylor sat by Selena's side, his tall frame bent forward, elbows on his knees, his large hand wrapped gently around her tiny one. He had faced sleepless nights before, closing deals, negotiating under pressure, traveling across the world, but this was different. This sleeplessness was heavy with fear, sorrow, and questions he had no answers to. Every now and then, Selena stirred. Her lips moved, her voice no louder than a whisper, but the word was always the same. "Mommy!" The sound pierced through Baylor's chest like a blade. He swallowed hard, squeezing her hand a little tighter, as if his warmth could make up for the absence she mourned even in her sleep. He leaned close and whispered, "I'm here, little one. I won't let you go." But in his heart, a storm raged. Where was Elena? Where was the woman whose name had shaken his entire world that morning? When dawn broke, Baylor was no longer just a millionaire CEO. He was a man desperate for answers. He quietly stepped out of the hospital, his heart pounding with determination. He called his most trusted men, people who handled his business affairs, and gave them one order: not to secure a company, not to win a contract, but to find Elena Faith. For hours, they searched. They moved through neighborhoods, spoke to people quietly, checked records with care. Baylor waited anxiously, his phone gripped tightly in his hand, his eyes constantly flicking back toward the hospital, as if afraid Selena would vanish if he looked away too long. By late afternoon, one of his men finally returned with news. The look on his face was enough to make Baylor's chest tighten. "Sir, Elena Faith passed away. Months ago, she died in a car accident." The words struck like lightning. Baylor staggered back a step, the world spinning around him. His lips parted, but no sound came. Elena, gone? The woman he had once held so close, the woman whose laughter still echoed in the corners of his mind, was no longer alive. His chest heaved, his fists clenched. He had carried regrets for years, and now the chance to make them right was forever gone. But then came the second blow. Her daughter, Selena, was left with distant relatives, people who barely took care of her. That's why she ended up on the streets, weak and alone. She wasn't wanted, Mr. Reed. Baylor's jaw tightened. His eyes burned with fury and sorrow all at once. He imagined the child he had carried from the cold street, whispering for her mother while clutching a broken teddy bear, abandoned, neglected, unwanted. His breath shook as he whispered, "She has no one." He turned back toward the hospital, his steps heavy but certain. With each stride, his resolve hardened. Money couldn't bring Elena back. Power couldn't erase the accident or undo the years he had wasted. But one truth echoed in his chest, louder than any regret. Selena was here. He opened the hospital door and walked straight back into her room. She was still there, still small, still fragile, still clutching that teddy bear like a lifeline. Baylor stood beside her bed, his hand reaching for hers once again. Looking down at her, he whispered through the tightness in his throat, "You only have me now, and I promise, little one, I won't fail you." In that moment, Baylor Reed, once untouchable, untamed, untouchable by emotion, became something else entirely. He became the man who would fight, not for empires or wealth, but for a child who had no one left. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic, but in that small room, warmth began to bloom. Days turned into nights, and Baylor never left Selena's side. He worked from his laptop by her bed, took calls in the hallway, but always returned, afraid she might wake up and find herself alone again. Selena, fragile as glass, grew a little stronger each day. Her laughter hadn't yet returned, but her silence began to soften. She didn't speak much, just whispers, broken words, but her gestures spoke louder than anything. Whenever Baylor walked in, her big blue eyes followed him. If he tried to step away, her small hand shot out, trembling, clinging to his finger as if he were her lifeline. One evening, when the sun dipped low and painted the room in soft orange light, Baylor walked in with a carefully wrapped box. Inside was a brand new teddy bear, plush and warm, its fur golden brown, its ribbon tied perfectly around its neck. He knelt beside her bed, smiling gently. "Look, sweetheart, a new friend for you." Selena blinked at the toy, her thin fingers reaching out. For a moment, Baylor thought she might let go of the old, ragged teddy lying beside her. But when she touched the new one, she quickly drew her other teddy closer to her chest. The one with missing fur, one eye almost gone, and stitches across its belly. Baylor's voice was soft, almost trembling. Why do you keep this one, Selena? This old bear doesn't even have both eyes anymore. Selena hugged it tighter, her lips parting. With a breath so faint he almost didn't catch it, she whispered, "Mommy!" The single word pierced him like a knife. It wasn't just a toy to her. It was a piece of her mother, the last memory she could hold on to. Baylor's throat tightened. His eyes stung with tears he refused to let fall. Slowly, he leaned closer, brushing back her soft hair with a tenderness he never knew he was capable of. "Don't worry, little one," he whispered, voice breaking. "You're not alone anymore. I'll take care of you, always." For the first time since he met her, Selena's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was small, weak, and fleeting, but it was real. Baylor froze, staring at her in wonder. That tiny smile felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. And in that moment, he realized something he couldn't deny. His heart had finally found its missing piece. Months later, Selena was no longer the pale, frightened child Baylor had carried from the cold street that night. Her cheeks now glowed with color, her hair shone under the golden sunlight, and her laughter, sweet, unrestrained, floated through the vast garden like music Baylor never knew his soul needed. She ran barefoot across the soft grass, her little teddy bear swinging in her hand, its torn ear bouncing with every step. That same bear, once a symbol of loneliness, had now become a symbol of hope. Her giggles echoed, and even the birds seemed to pause to listen. From the wide porch of his mansion, Baylor sat in silence, watching her. His powerful hands, once used only to sign million-dollar contracts, now rested calmly on his knees, holding a cup of coffee he had completely forgotten about. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, softened as they followed Selena's every move. In that moment, Baylor Reed was not the feared CEO of towering skyscrapers. He was just a man, a father, a protector. When Selena suddenly turned, her small face lit up. She spotted him watching and, with all the innocence in the world, ran toward him, her tiny legs moving as fast as they could. "Daddy!" she cried out, her voice carrying more power than all the applause he had ever received in boardrooms. Baylor's chest tightened. That one word struck him deeper than all his life's achievements. He bent down, arms wide open, and scooped her into his embrace. The warmth of her little arms around his neck melted years of loneliness he had hidden beneath polished suits and empty wealth. Neighbors who once whispered that Baylor Reed was too cold, too ambitious, too heartless to ever know love, now saw something different when they passed by. They no longer saw the ruthless businessman. They saw a man walking hand in hand with a little girl. They saw him kneel down to tie her shoes, carry her teddy bear, or patiently braid her messy hair when she asked. Some who had judged him harshly felt ashamed. Others felt inspired. Mothers would smile softly. Fathers would nod with respect. Children from next door would call out to Selena, and she would laugh and wave, no longer the silent, broken child of before. The mansion that once stood as a symbol of power now stood as a home, filled with laughter, warmth, and bedtime stories whispered under soft blankets. Baylor himself had changed. He no longer lived only for deals and deadlines. He lived for morning hugs, for the sound of small footsteps running toward him, for the way Selena slipped her hand into his without hesitation. He realized the greatest truth. Family is not about blood. It is not about money or last names carved into buildings. It is about love. It is about protection. It is about giving a child a place to belong when the world has taken everything from her. Baylor Reed, the man who once thought happiness was found in success, now knew it was found in the laughter of a child. And Selena, the little girl who once whispered "mommy" on the cold street, had found a new word, a new world, and a new life. She had found her daddy, and together they had found what society often forgets, that love, not wealth, is the greatest treasure of all.